This is a very moving moment for me because I actually went to school here in this building. I was young. I was learning how to be a successful failure, which is not as easy as it sounds. I'm not sure if I've succeeded because every time I try to fail now, I fail at failure. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about turning 0 into 1 today, which sounds like a disastrous thing to do because computers, of course, run on the distinction between 0 and 1. But quantum computers run on the idea of parallel worlds and universes running alongside each other. And we're now reaching the stage where traditional 0 and 1 computers are going to be replaced by quantum computers. And quantum computers already have the intelligence of a very bright tadpole, which is a very stupid level of intelligence. But in that sense, they have, I believe, failed in a very interesting way. My own intelligence is actually 64,000 tadpoles in parallel. And I've used this mostly to impress my friend Donald Gleneagles, who's a philanthropist slash entrepreneur. He slashed an entrepreneur with a very small Swiss penknife. And for this he was awarded the Swedish Academy's highest prize for philanthropy. Donald and I are really on a spiritual journey, and this is perhaps the most important thing I'll say to you today. We really have to stop and smell the flowers, and we need to know what that means because life is fleeting and short, but smelling the flowers is very important because flowers, of course, are highly sexual, and when you smell them, they really enjoy it. I'm hoping that this will be the worst TED talk that's ever been given. This is my ambition, but I know I'm going to fail at it because there have been very many very bad ones. But at least in my own personal history, it can be as bad as my presentation to AGA, the American Institute of Graphic Arts in Colorado. I gave an awful speech about how Wi-Fi was like smell. You could actually stop and smell Wi-Fi networks, and you just needed instead of your nose, you needed your iPhone. And this, I'm glad some of you are laughing because this went down very, very badly in Colorado. And I noticed that many people had nasal injuries afterwards because they'd been stopping to try to smell Wi-Fi routers, which is actually very dangerous if it's raining. But I'm not here simply to crack stupid jokes. This is very, very serious, and I want to draw some inspiration from a great spiritual thinker. He's called Meister Eckhart. Meister Eckhart Tolle, actually. And his great theme is surrender. And many people have surrendered to him, and they've given him not just money, but a lot of Facebook likes and all the rest of it. And this is really, I think, what for instance, my great ambition to fail has been, as I say, a failure. But I am actually 85 years old, and you must admit I'm not looking bad for that age. In this sense, I've failed at aging, and that's a very important thing to fail at. I think many of us in the future are going to fail at aging. Failure, of course, is just a matter of perspective. It's about when you look and where you look from. If I do gestures, by the way, this is because I'm very nervous. I found this is a good way to calm down. I'm actually very influenced by a Japanese theatre director called Hiraka, who has a very naturalistic dialogue, but very strange and affected physiology of gestures. So characters like talking about going to a love hotel, for instance, but they're doing this. And it has no relation at all to what they're talking about. This is a form of Brechtian alienation, which is, I think, something we could carry over into our daily lives. I remember once my friend Donald Gleneagles and I, two billionaires, very successful people, both 85 years old. This happened earlier this year, in fact. We were walking in Tibet because we wanted to save Tibet from the Buddhists. And we saw a monastery up ahead, and we thought there was sure to be Buddhists in there. But of course, there's a difficult political situation with Buddhism in China. And we found that in fact it was being used as a recruitment center for the Navy. The Tibetan Navy, which of course is a very strange organization since there's no sea in Tibet. But they're idealists, and they believe that one day ocean levels will rise, and Tibet will be the only, being a very high country, will be the only country left. They're optimists, and I believe we can all be optimists. Failure is a question of looking backwards, for instance, instead of forwards. You can be optimistic looking backwards. If you've fallen from the heights of your success, you can look back and see that, in fact, they're ahead of you. If I look back at my life, for instance, I can see myself failing ever more and more, to a greater degree, to the extent of my birth, going back to my birth and rebirthing myself, having nothing to look forward to except the entire history back to the Big Bang of the universe. You can imagine the Big Bang will hurt a lot. But that's not really my concern. My concern is turning 0 into 1. Oh, my arm has become paralyzed. Now, this could be an awful disaster in public speaking to have a paralyzed arm, especially at an embarrassing angle like this. But in this case, I'm going to turn a misfortune into an advantage. I'm going to use this to fascinate you all, perhaps hypnotize some of you who are hypno-suggestive. Because if you watch my fingers trembling, the tips of them are actually trembling very pathetically just now. You can see that not only am I using these fingers as what we call in the acting trade business, a piece of business, but I'm using the room, the space of the room. Because if I twist my waist here, I can actually indicate the room, parts of the room. I can point to people in the audience. And I can see that this is becoming, perhaps, the 100th worst TED Talk ever given. And that I have 10 minutes left to make it perhaps the 50th worst. And then, perhaps just in the last couple of minutes, the absolute worst. I'm nothing if not ambitious. I believe in transformation, self-transformation, particularly. But I went back to the great master of change, who's not David Bowie, but Ovid, who wrote the Metamorphoses. The original Metamorphoses, of course, Kafka's version is ripped off. And Ovid believed that humans could transform into animals. And I, reading this, had the idea that I should become a hedgehog. Now, I'm not sure if you know what a hedgehog is. I mean, in Japan, perhaps they don't have. Hedgehogs are small, spiny animals with pointy noses. I don't see any internet cult websites, Tumblr pages about hedgehogs. I don't see any Kickstarter pages trying to finance new hedgehog breeding, gene splicing projects. This is sad for me because hedgehogs are in fact tremendously interesting as failures. They're the great failures of the animal kingdom in the sense that they still exist. They haven't plucked our heartstrings by becoming extinct, but also because they are actually tremendously compassionate. And compassion is something that I learned the value of from Eckhart Tolle, who said we must surrender to the hedgehogs. He didn't actually say that, I'm quoting him out of context. I was actually holding one page against another page. A hedgehog, observe a book of hedgehogs, in fact it's called, and Eckhart Tolle's Surrender. This is another thing you can do in order to fail, is you can put texts together so that the original sense in one text comes up against the original sense in another, and they both make perfect sense in a boring way in their own worlds, but then when you put them together, they suddenly become much more interesting. I think you'll begin to see that what interests me is not being right, but being interesting. But actually, since I want to fail, I have to become bored by what's interesting. And in this sense, I have to read a lot of Samuel Beckett, for instance, or go to the visual art world where people are actually doing very boring things, like, for instance, walking in a square, being filmed by, this would be a 2-video installation piece if I were walking in a square like this. But I would have to do this for about 87 days. Just walk in this square. Because the whole point of art is pointlessness. And it loses its point if it has a point. So it's a bit like failing the failure. I want to tell you about a kind of transcendental experience I had climbing a mountain. In Scotland, we don't have very tall mountains. We have, of course, Glen Trump, which is a magnificent obstacle. It's 10,000 meters tall. It's right in the middle of Scotland, and if you want to get from one part of Scotland to another, you have to pass over Glen Trump, because it's very stubborn. It refuses to let the Scots do what we want to do, which is to get from A to B. It's actually laid out like a gigantic clock face, and there are 12 cities organized around it. And periodically, since it's volcanic, it erupts, and lava floods down and destroys one of the cities. Luckily, it's very considerate, the volcano never destroys the same city twice. I don't know if any of you have been to Pompeii. I was there last year. Herculaneum, which is very close, also destroyed by the volcano. And I climbed Vesuvius, thinking that I would be able to learn about failure and the importance of failure when I got to the top. But of course, when I got to the top, all I found was other failure hunters, people avid like me for failure, with these sort of butterfly nets of failure, trying to catch failure. As an independent recording artist, I'm a musician as well as a writer, I've failed now for continuously for 35 years, which, of course, I started late, being 85 years old. I started in my 50s. But before that, I was actually a very successful entrepreneur. I actually began not only hedgehog farming, but philanthropy, taunting, seminars. And all these skills which I learned in those seminars, I've actually forgotten one by one, except donkey riding. This is pretty important if you want to disguise yourself. Take a donkey as a kind of accomplice. You can find, I see I have 5 minutes and 20 seconds left. Okay, I have to concentrate on making this worse. Okay. Pauses. Now, it's very disconcerting in the world of constant chatter, constant social media feeds, to allow a little silence in. Well, that's 3 seconds of silence. And I know some of you are probably wondering, because the visual is very important. You're looking at me and thinking two things. Why is he wearing a narrow jacket like a Bond villain? The answer to that is quite easy, because I am a Bond villain. I am the enemy of everything that Ian Fleming liked. Ian Fleming, of course, hated the wonderful, brutal architecture, brutalist architecture of Arnold Goldfinger, the great pioneer of concrete beton. And he used the name Goldfinger for a villain in one of the Bond films, one of the Bond novels, in fact. And the other question you're probably asking yourself is, why is he wearing an eye patch? And the answer to that, I don't think in 4 minutes I can actually tell the whole story, but the short version is, never try to repair a broken alarm clock while it's still inside the crocodile. That would be a very good line to finish on, but I still have 3 minutes and 56 seconds, and I realize that I still have within my grasp the opportunity to make this the worst TED Talk ever. So I can tell a really awful rock and roll anecdote. It's about me and Mark Knopfler, who I can see from your reaction nobody's heard of. He's actually a very, very little known independent musician. He's been recording for a small Portland, Oregon-based label for even longer than I have. He decided not to release his most potentially successful song, Songs of Swing, and as a result, he never made it. I'd just like to say that I admire him for that. not making it as actually the most original thing you can do in this world of greed and ambition. And I think if we could all go to Tibet, kneel down by a hedgerow, stop and smell the flowers, damage our noses perhaps slightly on a wireless router, we would all be better people, although with worse noses. Thank you for coming today and listening to this complete nonsense.